So my name's Chris Wahl. I'm the chief technologist at Rubrik. I'll be doing kind of the introductory stuff, the boring, what's the problem, that kind of jazz. And then I brought a lot of amazing talents that work at Rubrik to really dive deep into the product, the vision, the strategy, all that kind of jazz. So hopefully that's cool. I wanted to start out by outlining our focus because I think that's really important. And especially this room, I feel like if I put a statement like this on the screen, then it'll really resonate with the messaging that you're expecting from a top-notch vendor in this space. And bonus points if you spot the amazing hashtag that's there. So I obviously love to help those that are looking to play our famous game. You want me to put that back on there? Would that be helpful? Did you see it? Okay. Like, yeah? There you go. For those that are playing the Buzzword Bingo game at home, you now win, right? You've got all of them on there for you. But seriously, though, I do want to do a quick introductory type spiel just for those that hadn't seen us before or potentially haven't watched an earlier field day video. What's wrong with you? You should do that. Here's our 4 co-founders. The company is a little over 3 years old now. The product's been out a little over 2 years, right? So Pipple, Soham, Nitro, which is a really cool name, and AJ are all from various blends of consumer enterprise companies. So there's kind of the background on the founder level. Obviously, they're looking to target the data protection market. It's actually quite huge. From a funding perspective, we have had some updates from our previous time on Tech Field Day, or Field Days in general. So we did close our Series D, and I don't even know if we had our Series C on a previous one. So a C and a D have been closed, adding IVP as one of our investors for the Series D, putting us at just under $300 million invested into the company. A lot of people seem to like what we're doing. There's some buzz out there. Now, as a delegate and as an architect in the channel, I didn't really care about this stuff in the past. Apparently, it is somewhat important, especially the larger enterprise customers that are looking for those proof points and things like that. I won't spin on that too much. It's time to get to the most interesting part of the presentation, the problem. I will be short. I will be sweet. I will try to get done with it as soon as possible because Teresa has told me I need to get to the bleeping point or else she won't be interested. So obviously, I need to help do that. So real quick, for those that are familiar, the problem. The problem is that data protection, or let's call it backup for an easier and simpler word, sucks, quite plainly. Back in the 90s, when I started working in IT, which is either a long time or not very much time, depending on how long you've been in IT, we had to deal with this kind of architecture. You go out and you shop your storage and your servers, and you build proxies. And I'll tell you, the first couple times I did it, I really sucked at it because I didn't know what I was doing. And the vendors are all like, buy my particular piece within the stack and put it together. There was one kind of major iteration to that architecture that came out in the 2000s where it was like, oh, instead of going direct to tape, you can now dedupe that data, put it on disk, and replicate it and do all that kind of fun stuff. But ultimately, you're responsible for doing all these things. Even if you buy from a vendor that potentially puts them all under one roof, this architecture still exists underneath the covers, right? And this isn't a very good architecture. It's very monolithic in nature, doesn't scale very well. And back to my first point, it just kind of sucks, right? So there we go. That's Sad Panda. We don't like Sad Panda, especially at Field Day. We like Happy Panda. I do not have a picture of a Happy Panda, even though Andrew picked one out for me. So what we do at Rubrik, very quickly, we take all these things that you need to build backup, we distill them into software. We distribute them across a platform, which comes in physical, cloud, or virtual as its way to distribute. And in this particular case, I'm just saying we collapse it down into the software stack. The first thing that we put on the market was an appliance. It's 2U, 4 nodes. You scale them out. You start with one appliance, add more appliances. It logically looks like one thing. From a services and addressability perspective, it is one thing. There's no demarcation points for compression or deduplication or anything like that. So you just grow as you need. And we're trying to leverage things like public cloud or just object and file and NAS and things like that for archive. Right? Those tend to be very simple use cases. I know you heard from some other vendors in kind of that public object kind of space talking about this is a popular use case to put backup data in there. Yes, it is, especially when you globally dedupe it under one namespace. Right? So a little bit more techie, real quick, to cover the nerd knobs a bit. You've got your primary environment, server storage, all that kind of jazz, physical applications, virtual applications, whatever. You deploy the appliance on-prem or potentially our cloud version for your cloud workloads. I'm just going to cover the on-prem for this particular slideware. Put that in. It inventories your environment. Either it's physical or virtual. We're talking to the APIs for something like a manager, like vCenter or Acropolis or Hyper-V, something like that. Or physically, we're talking through our connector to interface our API to that particular software. Once that's done, all the data is actually flowing parallel to Flash within the nodes right? So there's a lot of performance. The bottlenecks that you're typically having to solve with proxies and whatnot go away. This is all controlled using policy, because having to build backup jobs also sucks. I don't know why you'd really want to do that. And as an architect, to try to be like, oh, here's 1,000 applications. What order should I do them in? I don't know. That's why we have traffic lights for cars. There's no one person that can do all that. So the policies dictate all of the ingest and the backup, things like that, all the stuff you don't want to have to deal with. If you want to recover something, which is probably like the point of backup, it's not just a fancy thing that you put in your data center that blinks and eats power. You can do it instantly. So we're talking a few seconds in most cases, up to a minute, potentially if it's really huge or weird. Everything's secure, right? So all the encryption, both internode communication, pulling data out of the primary environment, putting data into an archive environment, et cetera, fully encrypted everywhere using your keys. Because with the ransomware and whatnot, really just plain common sense, you obviously want to secure your data. And then finally, if you want to get the data out of the appliance, which we suggest, because if you were just infinitely to buy Rubrik, that'd be kind of pricey, put it to private or public resources. That's object store, blob store, file, whatever it is that you have. Right? So it takes this architecture where you're kind of having to get a person or a collection of people to put all these things together, the proxies and servers and enterprise search servers and all that kind of jazz. You just kind of throw all that away from an architectural perspective. You don't need that anymore. It simplifies the entire equation to put a certain amount of Rubrik in an appliance form factor in the data center, potentially some in the cloud, and then just scale it out as you need to, performance and capacity, because no one wants to deal with that. You've probably seen that before because that was like our main pitch for a long time. But honestly, this is cloud field day, right? They can't just be like, here's your data center and backing some stuff and shooting it off to the cloud. That's kind of like, that's lame, right? That'd be like BS cloud field day. So we're in like legit big boy pants mode. A couple differentiators. And again, they all have really cool demos for all this stuff. The rest of my team, I'm just the guy that kind of warms you all up, make sure that the coffee's hitting the veins, things like that. So that was the beginning, some big differentiators. The first is that when you look at other products, whether or not they say like, oh, it's unified, or you're actually building it using software and storage and stuff like that yourself, it's typically not end-to-end management. There's a manager of managers, there's various element managers that are being talked to under the covers, or potentially you're sold a unified thing and then you are the manager of managers, which also sucks, right? So in this case, Rubrik, the software, the fabric itself controls everything. That can be done using we call it here set and forget simplicity, because I want to just build some policy, interact with APIs, and be done, right? I want to spend a few minutes a week tops dealing with this system. I don't want to be in there, I want to forget what the UI looks like entirely. That's kind of the goal, right? I just want to manage things at the policy and API and kind of service catalog level. So that's another major point here. Everything's API driven, even under the covers. And then finally, it should be, it's kind of a loaded term there, the cloud native design. I know there's some, apologize for a little buzzy there. I already let you win the buzzword bingo. But the idea that this is not a bolt-on, we did not take an original idea that was built for on-premises type workloads and then add cloud as kind of an afterthought. The cloud technologies that we started with for S3 and object and things like that were native to the platform, right? They're intrinsic to how we do business. The APIs are intrinsic to how we have the models and the modules of software talking to one another. So this is not bolt-on. This is not like, oh, this cloud thing's kind of catching on. We should chase that. It was like from day one, this is in the DNA of the product, right? So what we started with, when you look at Tech Field Day 12 or 10 or Virtualization Field Day 5, which we were all at previously, was you've got VMs running and then physical workloads and things like that. You've got some Rubrik appliances running in the data center. What we started adding to this equation is, well, yeah, you can shuffle that data out to S3 or we'll just say cloud storage generically, right? With S3 from Amazon as our original intent. We also allow you to run Rubrik as a cluster in there. We'll let you build it and manage it as a separate standalone cluster running in that environment. In fact, you could just go totally whole hog into the cloud and not even have a physical deployment if you so choose. But if you want to, you can tether them together, have them replicate, have the data move around based on your needs. You can start spinning up workloads based on backups that you've archived to the public cloud, right? And we'll go into that and that technology, which we call Cloud On. But then beyond that, if you're looking for a multi-cloud strategy, we also allow you to deploy the software into Azure, which was the second cloud that we targeted, as well as using their blob store, replication between clouds, potentially archiving between clouds. You can really choose, in some cases, to go with one and then have the other be kind of your backup, right? Your backup of a backup. So the topology is whatever you need it to be. And I want to point out, because this is important, it may be a piece that others have left off what they're talking about, this is all generally available, right? This is GA code. Our Ultra release 4.0 is not vaporware, slideware, going to be here in 6 to 9 months. This is actually here, and we'll be showing it to you today. If the Wi-Fi gods will be kind to me, and the internet gods will be happy. So some use cases. If you can take data and you can put it into a public cloud from an archive perspective, why can't you act on it and start automatically looking at the shape and the format of that workload and handle all the heavy lift to convert it into an AMI running in EC2, which is what we introduced with Cloud On. Things like that really empower you to start leveraging that giant mound of EC2 compute that's available. Beyond that, from an app and database perspective, we've always allowed you to do instant recovery. The idea of bringing back an application beyond file and folder level stuff, that's Bush League. Full application restores within a few seconds. We also now offer that with databases. Our first one is Microsoft SQL, right? So you can, and Michael Fall here will actually demonstrate that, where we can bring on huge databases instantly, like within seconds or a minute, so that you can start leveraging that. And the locality of that recovery is not limited to the data center, right? So you can start doing some really interesting things once you have a giant pile of compute and resources in a public cloud and the ability to spin up or move data around at will. So as kind of my final homage to Rubrik, you have a data management platform that spans pretty much any private or public resource that you want, right? And that's been our vision all along, is start with the data center, attack the enterprise, make sure that we're solving their pain points, and then help them get into that cloud model that they're looking for with a bunch of interesting topology options, right? But underneath there, that's where I get excited. It's all API driven. It's native. There's no price for it. It's just like someone asked, can you turn the API off? I'm like, well, then the product would stop working because we make calls to the API between our software stack. You can actually hit F12 on Chrome developer mode. You can see all the calls in real time. But that means that if you're looking to do anything in cloud, obviously you need APIs. So this isn't a heavy lift. It's pretty simple. A few summary points here. I'll only highlight the last one. It's an experience that you actually love using, right? I've never thought in my life, I would say, that I liked using a backup product, but it's fun. Customers are like, this is cool. Someone tweeted kind of shamefully, like, I really kind of like this Rubrik thing. I like backup, and I feel dirty. I'm like, and you should feel dirty, but also awesome, because you have a cool system in play now. So what did I do? Like 10 minutes, tops 15 minutes. I got all the what is the problem statement out of the way, and you've won buzzword bingo. I think we're cool there, and this is a cool spinny thing that you can just stare at and come mesmerize at. I will end it there, and we'll switch to the nerd stuff. Before I kind of walk off, any questions I can answer? All right, that's fine. Oh, go ahead.
Amount of money for a backup/data management company.
Thank you.
You're
well, it is for a backup company. That's why they have to be a data management.
Yeah.
It's been there, man. Yeah, you sharp.
Cheeky.
There's a question there, though.
Yeah. The question is, your investors have obviously pummeled you for the information, but I mean, there's a long game here. Must be a very long game with very big plans. Cool. To support that kind of valuation. Can you say anything?
What's my roadmap? Like the next 2 years?
Well, like, not just on the roadmap, but people.
What's the business roadmap?
Yeah, what's the business roadmap?
Who are you going to be when you grow up?
Who are we going to be when we grow up? The same people we've been competing against, I think, throughout the whole process. It's not we've not really been in the market of, let's go after the startups and things like that. It's been the incumbent vendors that own the market share. And I don't want to name names, but if you look at who owns the market today, that's obviously who you have to take it from.
To someone that's trying to not be a hardware storage vendor and become data smart, you're going to replace them.
Yeah, it's difficult to take a platform that is 10 plus years old and make it do all these things without a complete refactor. So I think there's a certain advantage strategically at that point, but also if you look at that slide that I built with the on-prem going to multi-cloud, just keep kind of envisioning beyond that point. We keep adding more and more options to the topology that drive use cases that people have been kind of chasing and trying to, they've got their hands just barely around it. They're trying to grasp it, and they kind of keep swishing through the cloud, so to speak. Like they can't get an ephemeral grip on it, and now they kind of can. And an interesting way the vehicle is through backup and recovery. So
is the vision also always backup and recovery, or is this the first stepping stone to other kind of things?
Well, I think from a messaging and a target perspective, backup and recovery is a problem everyone has. So why start with a niche and try to expand it? We took something very public and painful, which is backup and recovery. But if you kind of rewind a little bit to that being a use case, backup and recovery, there's also copy data management, analytics, potentially test dev, that kind of jazz. There's a lot of different use cases. I've always viewed backup and recovery as just one of them, and typically the strongest and most relevant to an architect or engineer's mind, and something that you have to have, or at least you say you have, right? Eric and I did some consulting. Some people say they have backup, they don't, but you probably should. But it's certainly not the end at all. It was just the start.
But I think even backup and recovery, it's probably the single most screwed up area within an IT function, and has been that way for a very long time. When I say screwed up, I don't mean to be demeaning. I ran those orgs
the most
too.
horrible, clunky
But it's not.
tools.
It's not done well.
Yeah,
There's not a lot that's invested in it that really should be, and part of it is because it gets incredibly complicated, especially as you start thinking about RTO, RPO, and all the different application and integrity checks and everything else, and you go on and on and on. And so one of the things I'm kind of interested in looking in more detail is just how do you simplify that?
Okay.
Because to me, if you simplify that, that's a no-brainer for practically every enterprise on the planet, right? So great to hear that you're going other places, but if you get backup and recovery done well, that's a huge, huge success.
So,
I don't know, though.
Chris, just to speak to that, what is the TAM for backup and recovery, and are you guys public about your run rates?
We don't. The last public number we stated run rate was approaching 100 million annually. As far as the TAM, I think the last published numbers are a couple years old, but it was north of 40 billion.
Okay.
So we'll say 50 billion to make the number easy. And that was the copy data management specific piece of the puzzle. So it's pretty big.
Yeah, I think that's a different way to answer the question. Is that market is so huge, we don't really need to focus on anything else if we don't want to.
That's fair.
I don't know, though. I think, though, increasingly that's going to become commoditized, and so even if it wasn't for the ridiculous valuation, impressive valuation, there's a need to be looking to the future, and it's the smart stuff you can do on that kind of commoditized storage backup stuff that's important.
It's not that I disagree with you. I agree with you. I'm just saying there's such a need for this across so many IT organizations, so many enterprises today, that if that's all you did, that's a huge win. That's a huge win for not just for Rubrik, but I mean for the companies. Now, I agree with you. I think if you do that well, then you have access to an interesting set of data and analytics that you can do some very cool things with.
But I mean, that is true, but it's a heck of a tough sell, because backup and recovery is one thing. Live mounting databases is cool, but getting into the data management where you then run analytics on secondary copies, you're now selling into your analytics team, into your DBA team, into your backup and recovery team. It becomes a far more difficult sell. But I do agree that sorting out backup is a major pain point.
There's two bits that have made it really cool. One is that it's become easier because of the way the deployment technology works. Like, that's just become simpler than what we had with servers because of the changes in technology. Then we had ransomware come along, which suddenly turned what was an insurance problem into something which is like, I need it now, because everyone decides that they need to have insurance when their neighbour's house burns down. Everyone's neighbour's house is currently burning down, so everyone's gone, maybe I should do this recovery thing. Plus, it is easier to use. And these are not the only, like Rubrik are not the only company to have technology that makes it easier to do stuff like finding recoveries and so on. But to your point about what you do next, if everybody needs backup and recovery, you're already there. So now you start saying, well, we've got the data anyway, let's upsell you onto other stuff.
Yeah, no, that's fair enough. I was deliberately being sort of devil's advocate, because it's a high funding. It's a higher bar to justify that kind of money.
I'd expect nothing less, Julian.
Well, how much?
That's fair. I mean, and you've answered the question well. So, I mean, that's
that's fair.
worth,
That's the thing. If WannaCry comes in and locks up all of your stuff and you cannot run your hospital,
yeah, you're
what's that worth to you?
Yeah, but going back to you bring up a valid point, right? Which is there are a lot of different groups that have to get involved in this, right? But at the same time, how many of those groups really want to have to deal with the nuts and bolts of backup and recovery? I'm oversimplifying backup and recovery, but
That's okay.
I mean,
It's kind of similar to the conversation we've had before in terms of sales conversation, and you're talking to head of storage, but can you have a conversation with the CIO that says, hey, you want to do some analytics? We can do your storage dudette. She can be the hero of IT generally, or of the business generally, because she can enable snapshot and clone and analytics on top of that, and that having that conversation at the different layers. And throughout the silos is the difficult
because
one.
saying you can take your very traditional SQL Server customer database, move that to the cloud, spin it up, and then use Amazon's built-in analytics on that is a completely different mindset of, oh yes, well we can back up and restore your database when it fails. Yeah.
Well, I'll pause it there just because we have a lot of awesome demos. I want to make
Yeah,
sure.
no, let's go. I don't want to.
I love the conversation though, but thank you very much for this particular segment.